JANESTA presents Caribbean Roulette, Part 1, written by Janusz Gwoździewicz. Prologue. When the heart rises into the throat, the legs turn heavy as lead, and every breath scorches the lungs, a man begins to understand that an escape can end in only one of two ways. The man in army fatigues forced his way through the jungle, sweeping aside the dense leaves with what little strength remained to him. He stumbled, dragged himself upright, and ran on. Behind him he could hear the pursuit. He kept to a dry riverbed that led towards the ocean. If he remembered the map correctly, the beach lay no more than a few hundred yards ahead. Jimmy should be waiting there, the motorboat's engines already running. All he had to do was keep moving. Not look back, not think about the pain or how many men were closing in behind him. Insects clung to his sweating face. Branches scored the skin of his forearms, yet every few steps his hand returned to the pocket of his jacket. The package was still there, small, unremarkable, and worth more than the life of every man sent into the jungle that day. He had to deliver it. A sliver of sky appeared between the trees. Another 100 yards, perhaps less. An exposed root caught his boot and flung him to the ground. At that same instant, 2 bullets passed above his head and struck a nearby trunk. Only then did the rattle of a Kalashnikov reach him. The Cubans were closer than he had thought. He got up despite the pain in his knee, tore through the final wall of vegetation, and burst onto a beach flooded with sunlight. A motorboat rocked on the water several dozen yards away. Jimmy stood at the helm, watching the jungle. The moment he saw the running man, he moved to help him aboard. "Have you got the package?" he shouted, hauling him over the side. "I've got it. Go! They're right behind me." Jimmy thrust the throttles forward. The engines roared. The bow lifted clear of the water, and the sudden acceleration threw the fugitive against the gunwale. Soldiers spilled from the edge of the forest. An officer snatched off his cap and bellowed into a radio while the others opened fire on the fleeing boat. The first bursts tore up the water behind the stern. The next cut through the hull. The man felt a blow beneath his right arm, as though someone had driven a piece of white-hot metal into his flesh. Jimmy collapsed without a sound. A small, dark mark appeared in the center of his forehead. Then blood ran down his face. With no one at the helm, the boat began to turn. The wounded man crawled towards the controls. With one hand he fought to hold their course. With the other he pressed against the wound. Tears filled his eyes when he looked at his friend's motionless body. But he could not turn back. Not after all this. The package remained in his pocket, and the boat raced towards the open sea. He had to deliver it. He had to survive. Far beyond the coast, someone was already waiting for a message that could never be sent over an open channel. For the moment, however, the sea kept its counsel. Chapter 1. After all these years, the taxi stopped outside the Condado Hotel a few minutes before 5. I paid the driver and got out before he could give me the change. The September afternoon was hot, as Caribbean afternoons generally are, but a mild breeze came in from the ocean. The palms beside the entrance swayed lazily, as though time were merely a mainland superstition. Guests wandered into the hotel without haste. Porters pushed luggage trolleys. Someone laughed, someone else posed for a photograph. I alone took the steps 2 at a time. The message on my answering machine still played in my head. "Janusz, darling, I arrived this morning. I'm staying at the Condado. I'll be waiting at 5. Your Anya." Your Anya. 2 words no sensible man should have taken seriously after 22 years. Yet, they had been enough to make me abandon everything and come without asking a single question. We had met at school. Friendship came first, followed by a love to which neither of us had been able to give reasonable boundaries. Life eventually did it for us. It separated us efficiently, though never quite completely. From time to time, we spoke on the telephone or exchanged messages, each of us cautiously testing whether the other still remembered. She did. So did I. But she had never said she was coming to San Juan. She had not explained why she had chosen this hotel, or how she knew I would be free to meet her. I had asked myself those questions throughout the journey. Now, standing in the cool lobby of the Condado, I possessed not one answer among them. Reception stood to the right. Behind the broad desk was a young woman with olive skin and a smile so immaculate that it must have formed part of the uniform. "Excuse me, I'm here to see Miss Anna. Did she leave a message for me?" The receptionist regarded me more carefully. "Your name, sir?" "Janusz." She checked a notebook, then nodded towards the lifts. "Yes, senor. Miss Anna is expecting you. Room 805. I thanked her and walked away before she could see how much those words had affected me. The lift chimed almost at once. A party of German tourists emerged, conducting their conversation at a volume that suggested the success of the entire holiday depended upon its outcome. They passed without noticing the man whose past had just opened its doors to him. "Which floor, sir?" the lift attendant asked. 8. It came out too sharply. The man raised an eyebrow. "The 8th floor, please," I corrected myself. The doors closed without a sound. The mirrored walls offered me several versions of myself: closely cropped hair, a mustache, a sun-darkened face, and gray that advanced more confidently with every passing year. I had dressed much as I had at our last meeting, a linen shirt and light trousers suited to the Caribbean heat. Anna had an old photograph in which I looked almost the same. Almost. In that photograph, I was 26, and convinced that all my important decisions still lay ahead. Now I carried behind me a life I had never described even to those who considered themselves my friends. "Your floor, sir." I missed the first announcement. The attendant had to repeat himself. "Thank you." The carpet swallowed my footsteps. Room 805 waited on the left-hand side of the corridor. I stopped outside and raised my hand. All I had to do was knock. One small movement and 22 years would cease to be a safe distance. I did not do it. I walked to the window instead. My reflection stared back from the glass, gray at the temples, the familiar mustache, the face of a man who had spent too long in places where questions were best left unasked. Anna remembered somebody else, a young man certain the world would wait for him. The world had not waited. The handle moved behind me. I stepped back from the window, but the door remained shut. Silence. Perhaps I had imagined it, or perhaps Anna, too, stood on the other side and could not bring herself to take the final step. I returned and knocked twice. "Come in." I knew the voice at once. I entered a sitting room steeped in the light of the setting sun. Anna stood near the balcony with the ocean behind her. I saw first her silhouette, then the chestnut hair and the hands clasped uneasily at her waist. She did not look like the girl I remembered. She looked like the woman that girl might have become. "Close the door," she said. I did so without taking my eyes off her. She came towards me. With every step, some detail returned. The slightly lifted chin, the promise of a smile, the way she swept the hair from her neck. Her dark cherry dress moved softly around her. Memory was assembling her again, piece by piece. She stopped close enough for me to catch her perfume. "Hello, Janusz." "Hello, Anya." That one word was enough. Her expression trembled, and all the caution with which she had approached me suddenly fell away. She embraced me fiercely. "I thought you might not come." For a moment I had thought the same. I never had the chance to say it. Her lips found mine, and the hotel room dissolved, along with the ocean, the corridor, and all the years in which we had tried to live apart. The kiss was brief, though it carried the weight of our entire past. Anna drew away first. Her hands remained on my shoulders while she studied me, comparing the man before her with the image she had preserved through the years. "You've become so manly," she said at last. "The gray suits you. You look beautiful." "Only beautiful? Don't provoke me, I've only just arrived." She laughed. That laugh was what I remembered best. The tension vanished, and for a few seconds we were young again. She drew me towards the sofa. Only then did I properly notice the suite. Dark wood, leather furniture, a large mirror, and lamps beneath cream-colored shades made it elegant but impersonal. A whole life could be unpacked from a suitcase here and leave no trace the following morning. Anna sat beside me and crossed her legs. "I see you haven't changed," she observed, following my gaze. "At my age, a man should value the things he remembers fondly." Was that intended as an elegant excuse? It was the finest I could afford at short notice. She smiled, but something still hid behind the smile, something I could not name. "Tell me, Anya, what brings you here? San Juan is rather a long way to travel for a social call." Her eyes strayed towards the balcony. "Later. Tonight I simply want to be with you. No one has visited me here in 10 years. Allow me the luxury of being suspicious." "Must you still know everything?" "It is a defect of character." "I know. That is precisely why I'm asking you not to ask me anything tonight." She spoke gently, but the tone left no room for negotiation. I remembered this Anna as well, energetic, decisive, and accustomed to making decisions on behalf of everyone present. For a moment she watched the ocean. The setting sun set fire to the glass doors of the balcony. Then she turned abruptly. "I'm hungry. The restaurant or dinner here?" I had no time to answer. She reached for the telephone. "Dinner for 2, she told reception. "No, nothing from the menu. Ask the chef to prepare something special, a good wine as well, and champagne, but later." She replaced the receiver with the air of someone who had just concluded a significant negotiation. "Why did you bother asking me?" "Courtesy." "Naturally." She went to the drinks cabinet and took out 2 glasses. "An aperitif? With ice?" She mixed white Puerto Rican rum with passion fruit and fresh lime over ice. The drink was bright, cool, and treacherously gentle. She sat beside me again, and as she set down her glass, her hand came to rest upon mine. "Janusz, how did we ever allow our paths to separate?" "You know how." "Hush." She placed a finger against my lips. "Not tonight." The question remained between us, too large for a single answer and too painful to tackle over the first drink. The sun touched the horizon. At that latitude, dusk has little patience. The light fades, the colors disappear, and suddenly, evening has become night. "The gray really does suit you," Anna said. "It makes you look distinguished. Every morning it reminds me that I'm growing old. And it reminds me that I lived long enough to see you again." A knock at the door spared me the need to answer. 3 waiters entered the suite. The first pushed a large trolley. The other 2 carried china and bottles. They moved with practiced solemnity, as though a royal banquet were about to be served. At Anna's request, they placed the round table beside the balcony doors, then arranged the chairs, candles, and settings. Finally, the youngest waiter lifted a silver cover. 2 roast quails lay upon the platter, garnished with citrus, herbs, and a scattering of edible flowers. They looked almost too elegant to disturb. Anna clapped her hands. The waiter removed the decoration and carved the bird with a few expert strokes. "Which part would Madam prefer?" She indicated a leg. "I knew it," I said. "You always chose the legs. I prefer breasts, and not merely on poultry." Anna looked at the waiter, then at me. "Please forgive him. 22 years have passed, and he still believes that joke has improved with age. The waiter maintained a professional expression, although I could see a smile fighting for its freedom. The second man presented a bottle of Burgundy. Volnay, 1974. An excellent choice, I said, perfect with quail. I slipped $100 into the young waiter's pocket and indicated that we could manage from there. He bowed, and all three men withdrew. I did not yet know that the extravagant tip would prove one of my better decisions that evening. We were alone again. 5 candles burned on the trolley, while small lamps in the corners filled the room with a warm half-light. I raised my glass. To you, Anya, to our meeting, and to what the years failed to destroy. She touched her glass to mine. To us. The dinner was excellent, though I scarcely noticed the food. We watched one another, discovering familiar gestures on faces time had altered. "How is your family?" I asked at last. "How are your sons?" Anna put down her fork and smoothed the napkin across her lap. The marriage ended. After 15 years, we went our separate ways. Not long after I left for England, then. No. Later I tried to find you, but no one knew where you were. You didn't call until 5 years ago. You had changed your address. I had to wake a few old contacts. You always had your ways. For a moment she looked ready to ask who those contacts were, and why I had not used them sooner. She thought better of it and studied the flame of a candle instead. "You don't really know me," she said. "You remember a girl from long ago, and I ceased to be that girl years ago. A great deal has happened. To me as well. Don't interrupt. Whenever life became difficult, I thought of you. Of us. Of the days when we still believed everything could be repaired." Her voice faltered. "After you disappeared, I worried about you. All these years, somewhere deep inside, I still wanted you. Chance separated us, and people who claimed they knew what was best for us." Tears shone in her eyes. "I know," I said. "I know that now." The silence grew heavy. I did not want the evening to become a trial of the past, a case neither of us could win. "Shall we have some music?" Anna wiped her eyes and smiled gratefully. "Yes, before I make a complete fool of myself." I found a station playing quiet music and turned the volume low. The notes hovered at the edge of hearing, leaving ample room for thought. "Let's not ruin the evening," she said. "Pour the wine." I filled our glasses. This time to the future. If we still have one. We have tonight. Every future has to begin somewhere. I rose and held out my hand. "Dance with me?" Anna allowed me to draw her to her feet. I put an arm around her waist. She linked her hands behind my neck. We moved slowly, scarcely leaving the spot. After a while, she rested her head against my shoulder. "As though we had never been apart," she whispered. I closed my eyes. Her perfume mingled with the scent of wine and the warm night air entering through the balcony doors. I felt her heartbeat and the familiar tension in her body as my hand moved along her back. Time had truly begun to retreat. The telephone rang so loudly that we both started. Anna broke from my arms. For a second she stared at the instrument as though she knew who was calling and still hoped to be mistaken. "Answer it," I said. I stepped onto the balcony to give her a measure of privacy. Night lay across San Juan. Below, lights shimmered around the pool and along the seafront boulevard. Farther out, the navigation lamps of ships at anchor rocked upon the dark water. Anna's voice reached me from the room. She spoke Spanish, which years on the island had taught me well enough. "Yes, I'm ready." "Very well." "Of course. I'll wait for the signal." The signal. I went to the rail and turned my back to the sitting room. When Anna replaced the receiver, I pretended to be studying the lights on the water. She came up behind me, put her arms around my waist, and rested her cheek against my neck. "It's beautiful here," she said. "Like a dream." "Yes." I waited. She knew I was waiting. Business is going to interrupt our evening. I have an important meeting. I turned to face her. Can't it wait until morning? No. The answer came too quickly and too firmly. A moment later, she softened her voice. Janusz, my company sent me here for this very matter. I was certain the other party wouldn't contact me until tomorrow. Tonight was meant to be ours. Believe me. Everything in her explanation sounded reasonable. Only the word signal did not belong in a conversation about an ordinary business contract. I took her in my arms and kissed her. I would not demand answers she was not yet prepared to give. Will you call tomorrow? Yes. She held me close for another moment. You know, after all these years, I still love you. Then she stepped away and went to the balcony doors. She looked out towards the ocean, avoiding my eyes. I did not answer at once, not because I felt nothing. Quite the opposite, I felt too much, and every word seemed too small. I left the hotel shortly after 9. We had tentatively arranged to meet the next day. Anna would call to confirm the time. I took a taxi only part of the way home. A few streets before my house, I asked the driver to stop. I needed the night air and time to put my thoughts in order. I walked the cobbled streets of old San Juan, past colored facades, shuttered windows, and wrought-iron balconies. Several years earlier, I had bought a small house there, a sitting room, a bedroom with its own bathroom, and a modest kitchen. It was enough for a man who had no intention of inviting too many people into his life. That evening, for the first time in years, I wondered whether there might be room for one more. I should have been thinking about Anna, her kiss, and the words she had spoken on the balcony. Instead, my mind kept returning to the fragment of conversation I had overheard. I'm ready. I'll wait for the signal. I did not yet know that our meeting was no return to the past. It was the beginning of something I had spent years trying to escape. Chapter 2. Inez's Tavern. I did not go straight home. After my meeting with Anna, my thoughts were in turmoil, and the night air offered no relief. I needed somewhere noisy enough to drown out the questions. Inez's Tavern stood a few streets away. I went there often enough for the locals to have stopped treating me as a tourist, though not quite often enough for them to consider me one of their own. The hum of conversation reached me through the old, creaking door. Inside, the air smelled of rum, fried plantains, and fish seasoned with garlic. Fishing nets, wooden floats, and yellowing photographs of trawlers hung above the bar. Brass lamps cast a warm glow over the dark timber walls. In one corner, 2 men were playing dominoes, slamming the tiles onto the table as though the fate of the island depended upon the result. Inez stood behind the bar. She had olive skin, dark hair tied high, and a gaze capable of offering an invitation and a warning at precisely the same time. She noticed me almost at once. "Good evening, John." The usual. "Make it a double. The usual may not be equal to the evening." She reached for a bottle of aged Puerto Rican rum and set a heavy tumbler before me. "Trouble?" "No. The evening merely ended sooner than I had expected." Inez studied me. "A woman? Why must it immediately be a woman?" "Because a man who has lost money is angry. A man in trouble looks for the nearest exit. You look as though you cannot decide whether to celebrate or suffer." "A woman, then." She handed me the glass but did not immediately withdraw her hand. "A man like you should not live alone." "Solitude has its advantages." "Such as?" "Nobody asks questions." "And nobody irons," she replied, glancing pointedly at my crumpled shirt. I laughed for the first time since leaving the hotel. That too. New customers took seats at the bar, and Inez had to move away. I raised the tumbler to my lips. The rum burned my tongue, then spread through me in a slow, agreeable warmth. From the back of the room, someone waved an enormous hand. Carlos was difficult to mistake for anyone else. He was powerfully built, wore a thick beard, and a faded captain's cap that he probably kept on even in bed. A pipe hung from the corner of his mouth. He had commanded a fishing boat for years and looked exactly as a man should who had spent half his life at sea and the other half recounting it in taverns. He had once persuaded me to join him on a tuna expedition. We returned 2 days later, exhausted, soaked through, and without a single fish. But from that moment on, he regarded me as a friend. I went over to his table. "At last," he said. "I thought you had left the island without saying goodbye. You know I avoid crowds. You avoid life. That is quite a different thing." He indicated the chair opposite him. "Sit down. I have a story that will make your hair stand on end." "What remains of it?" Carlos burst out laughing and raised his glass. "To our health. We may need it." I sat and we drank. The rum struck harder than I expected. I had eaten almost nothing all day, and the hotel dinner and wine had merely lulled my body into a false sense of security. "Very well," I said. "Tell me." "You first. Inez says you look as though you have seen a ghost." I glanced towards the bar. Inez was serving customers without granting us so much as a glance. "I met a woman I had not seen for 22 years. Carlos sat up so violently that he nearly overturned the table. "That woman, your first love. Keep your voice down." "Inez, a bottle. We are celebrating." Inez appeared at the table with a cloth draped over one shoulder. "If you shout like that again, your celebration will continue in the street. Jan has found the love of his life." Her smile vanished for the briefest instant. "I found nobody. We met. That is all." Inez looked from Carlos to me. "I see." She said nothing more. She placed the bottle on the table, added it to Carlos's bill, and returned to the bar. "Did you see her face?" Carlos whispered. "We may have to find another tavern." "You may. I was not the one shouting." He poured us another measure. "What is she doing in San Juan?" "Business, apparently." "Apparently?" "That is all she told me." "And you believed her?" I did not answer. Carlos knew me too well to miss the hesitation. "Will you introduce us?" "First, I must discover who she is now." He lit his pipe and watched me through the smoke. "Some women never change. Everyone changes. Not you much. You still answer every question with another. And you still owe me a story." Carlos grew serious. He rested his pipe in the ashtray and leaned closer. "News reached me from Aguadilla this morning. There is a burned-out fishing boat in the harbor and a luxury yacht beside it." "Where?" "Near the port. Not some fisherman's tub, a proper motor yacht. The fire destroyed almost everything." "Almost? Something always survives?" The way he said it sobered me more effectively than cold water. "Was anyone aboard?" "The trawler's captain is dead. That is all I know. The police have closed part of the quay, but people are saying it was no accident. People always say that. This time they may be right. A friend at the port saw both vessels. The fire took hold as if whoever started it knew exactly where to place it." The tavern remained full of conversation, laughter, and the crack of dominoes. At our table, however, silence settled. "One body and 2 burned vessels," Carlos said. "Tomorrow the newspapers will make a sensation of it. The day after, everyone will have forgotten." "Perhaps that is the intention." He looked at me closely. "What do you mean?" "Nothing. Too much rum." I reached for my cigarettes, then put the packet down. The alcohol was beginning to cloud my head, and I had no wish to add another kind of fog. I called a waitress over and ordered tomato juice with ice, salt, and pepper. "You are becoming sensible in your old age," Carlos observed. "Someone at this table must." I changed the subject. "How is Mamacita? Still afloat?" That was what he called his boat. The vessel probably remembered a time when Carlos had possessed less stomach and more hair. "Do not insult a lady. She will make me money yet. You would have to refit her first. That is the problem. The engine may last another few years, but the deck, cabin, and electrics all need replacing. Tourists will not board a boat that looks as though it has just returned from a war." "How much do you need?" Carlos froze with the glass in his hand. "For what?" "The refit. I could join you in the business." "You are joking." "No." "Why would you do that?" I did not entirely know. Perhaps I wanted to help a friend. Perhaps meeting Anna had left me with a sudden need to prove that I could still build something lasting instead of merely walking away. "I like you, Carlos. I trust you. That is enough for a beginning." He watched me for several seconds, making certain the rum was not speaking on my behalf. Then he sprang to his feet and opened his arms as though preparing to embrace me across the table. "Sit down," I warned him. "We have signed nothing yet." Instead of embracing me, he clasped my hand in both of his. "You have fallen from heaven, brother. I wanted to ask you, but I did not know how to begin. We begin tomorrow, when we are both sober. I shall inspect the boat. We shall calculate the costs and agree the terms. This is to be an investment, not a gift. Of course, a proper business." He said it with the expression of a man who could already see his restored boat crowded with tourists. I looked at my watch. It was later than I had realized. Time for me to go. Carlos glanced mournfully at the unfinished bottle, but for once he did not object. "Tomorrow is another day," he conceded. "Thank you, John." At the door, he made another attempt to embrace me. I slipped aside, so he struck me on the shoulder with enough force to unbalance a smaller man. We parted almost immediately outside. Carlos lived on the other side of Old San Juan. He walked away whistling and planning Mamacita's future aloud. I watched until he disappeared around the corner. Only then did I remember what he had said about the burned fishing boat and yacht in Aguadilla. One dead man, a fire set by someone who knew precisely what he was doing, and only hours earlier Anna had arrived on the island on business she refused to discuss. I had no reason to connect the two events. Even so, I walked home more slowly than before, paying closer attention to the darkened windows and the empty mouths of side streets. Chapter 3. A Shadow in the Street. Despite the late hour, San Juan was still awake. Night brought relief from the day's humid heat, drawing people out of airless rooms to sit outside bars or talk through open windows. A fresh wind came in from the ocean. It ought to have cleared my head after the rum. Instead, it merely arranged my unease into a more orderly shape. My house stood on one of the narrow, cobbled streets of the old city. It was small and orange, with arched windows and a heavy door that had known better days. I had bought it several years earlier because, at first sight, it resembled the sort of place in which a man might disappear. Outside the entrance, I leaned against the wall and lit my last cigarette. I never smoked indoors. One should keep at least one bad habit on the other side of the door. I looked down the street. Two men were walking on the opposite pavement. They did not belong to the easygoing night crowd. Dark suits, measured steps, no conversation. They moved slowly, and both were looking in my direction. When they realized I was watching, they quickened their pace, passed my house, and turned into the nearest side street. The difficulty was that it led nowhere. I drew the smoke deep into my lungs and tried to remember where I had seen them before. The answer came a moment later. Inez's tavern. They had been sitting in a corner, partly concealed by shadow. I crushed the cigarette against the stone sill. They might live nearby. They might have been looking for an address. They might simply have left the tavern at the same time as I had. I believed none of it. Once inside, I locked the door. I checked the windows, the rear exit, and the reflection of the street in the small mirror beside the entrance. Only then did I open the shutters and let in the night air. Old habits were returning rather too readily. I showered and went to bed. Alcohol and exhaustion defeated vigilance, and I fell asleep almost at once. At 7 in the morning, determined knocking woke me. I pulled on a pair of trousers and went to the door. Celestina, the wife of the owner of the nearby bakery, was waiting outside. As she did every morning, she had brought bread, milk, and butter. She was short, comfortably round, and possessed enough energy for several people. I opened the door. "Buenos dias, Señor Jan. My husband chose the best rolls for you. Still warm. He remembered you do not like them too well baked." She entered without waiting to be invited and began arranging the groceries on the table. "You look dreadful," she announced. "Too little sleep or too much rum. Such beautiful weather, and you have the face of a man expecting a storm." "Good morning to you too, Celestina. Anything for the laundry? I collected some yesterday, but with men one never knows. I shall bring the ironing this afternoon, at about 4. I opened my mouth, but she gave me no opportunity to answer. "Excellent. Until this evening, then. Have the laundry ready." She spun on her heel and vanished through the door as swiftly as she had appeared. Silence reclaimed the house. I liked Celestina's morning visits. Her inexhaustible stream of words reminded me that beyond my walls, ordinary life continued, smelling of fresh bread and preoccupied with weather, bills, and washing. After a shower, I made coffee and sat down to breakfast. I spread butter and a little honey on the warm rolls, then opened my notebook. The day's program was uncomplicated: a meeting with an architect about a survey for a proposed development, lunch at a restaurant by the sea, and home before 4. At the top of the page, I added one more line. Wait for a message from Anna. I had given her my address on Calle de San Sebastián. She already had the telephone number. I did not use a mobile. I disliked the idea that anyone could reach me whenever they pleased. A landline and answering machine were entirely sufficient. I was a surveyor by profession. Life had taken me along several other roads, but surveying offered what those occupations had lacked: fixed points, verifiable distances, and boundaries not drawn by emotion. The commissions also allowed me to leave my savings untouched and preserve the appearance of an ordinary life. Coffee in hand, I went into the small garden on the eastern side of the house. I settled into a wicker chair and unfolded the morning newspaper. The news promised nothing remarkable: a concert by a popular singer, an argument over plans for a new hotel, and a forecast of yet another sunny day. Only a brief item in the crime section caught my attention. 3 days earlier, the captain of a fishing boat had been shot at a marina in Aguadilla. The assailants remained unidentified, and the police were appealing for witnesses. I read the report again. Carlos had mentioned 2 burned vessels. The newspaper referred only to a murdered captain. Perhaps the editors did not know the whole story, or perhaps someone had taken care that their readers never would. Puerto Rico lay at the meeting point of routes leading from South America to the United States and onwards to Europe. Smuggling, vendettas, and disappearances were hardly rare. The captain might simply have been in the wrong place or carrying the wrong cargo. I folded the newspaper. Without more information, every theory was merely a guess dressed for dinner. Before leaving, I put on light trousers, a white shirt, and sandals. Into my briefcase went the preliminary estimate and the survey documents. The meeting with the architect continued until noon. We discussed revisions, deadlines, and the control points that needed checking again on site. The work was predictable and therefore soothing. Afterwards, I walked towards the center of Old San Juan. Colorful facades reflected the fierce sunlight, flowers spilled from balconies, and tourists threaded their way between cars. The city had endured centuries of sieges, changing rulers and other people's ambitions, yet wore its history without becoming solemn about it. I stopped at my favorite cafe. It served strong coffee and pastries rather like eclairs, which reminded me of Gdansk. I chose a table beneath a large parasol and placed my briefcase on the empty chair. I ordered coffee and a pastry. Only then did I notice two men seated at the far end of the terrace, dark suits, sunglasses, far too formal for a Caribbean noon. The muscles at the back of my neck tightened. Were they the men I had seen the previous night? In darkness and after several glasses of rum, I might have been mistaken. Suits proved nothing. Their presence near my house might also have been coincidence. Two coincidences in a matter of hours, however, were beginning to resemble a pattern. I did not look at them directly. I watched their reflections in the cafe window and in a metal jug on the next table. They did not speak. One held a cup but never drank from it. The other glanced at his watch every few minutes. The waitress brought my order. I thanked her and tasted the pastry, though my appetite had gone. I remained long enough for the customers at the neighboring tables to change. The two men stayed exactly where they were. I needed a simple test. I beckoned to the waitress. "I am going to the shop for cigarettes. Please leave the table. I shall be back in a moment." "We sell cigarettes," she said. "Nearly every brand." "I know. I should like to stretch my legs." I put enough money beside the bill. "I shall pay now, just in case." "You should not say things like that." She smiled, but her eyes moved towards the men in suits. Either she had noticed them before I did, or she understood precisely what I intended to test. I walked out without haste, crossed the street, and stopped before a shop window. Pretending to examine the display, I watched the cafe in the glass. The men rose almost together. One paid the waitress, while the other pushed back his chair and surveyed the street. So much for coincidence. I entered the shop, asked for cigarettes, and stood beside the newspaper rack. Through the window, I watched both men cross to my side of the street. They did not stop at the entrance. They passed the shop and continued walking. I gave them 15 seconds, bought the first newspaper within reach, and returned to the cafe. They had disappeared. It proved nothing. They might have abandoned the operation when they noticed my maneuver. They might be observing me from a car, a doorway, or an upstairs window. It was even possible that they had genuinely been going elsewhere. I sat down again. From that moment, every reflection in the glass and every stranger lingering at a corner appeared suspicious. The waitress approached after a moment. "It is nice to see you alive and in one piece. The feeling is mutual. What is your name?" "Elena." "Jan. I know. You come here often. Do you ever go anywhere when you are not working?" Elena hesitated, then nodded towards the street. "On Saturdays, I sometimes go to El Batey on Calle del Cristo." "I shall remember." I ordered another coffee, this time without rum. I needed a clear head. When I returned home, a message was waiting on the answering machine. "Hello, Jan. I have a proposition for you. Call me." Anna's voice immediately pushed the two men, the newspaper report, and the burned yacht into the background. I dialed the hotel. "I have just heard your message." "I'm glad you called. Can you give me the next 2 days?" "I can. Where are we going?" "I shall collect you tomorrow morning in a hired car. I will explain the rest on the way." "Still mysterious." "I cannot discuss it today, and I shall not be able to see you this evening. I will make it up to you tomorrow." "What time?" "Be outside the hotel at 9. Wait by the entrance." "I'll be there." For a moment, neither of us ended the call. "Until tomorrow, Jan," she said more softly. "Until tomorrow." I replaced the receiver. I disliked journeys arranged without a plan. I ought to have asked about our destination, accommodation, and the people we were to meet. Instead, I had agreed without a moment's thought. 2 days with Anna were enough for reason to surrender its chair to hope. I went into the garden and lit a cigarette. When the first excitement subsided, the image of the two men leaving the cafe returned. Who were they? Why should they care about a man who surveyed plots of land, drank coffee, and had spent years trying not to inconvenience anyone? The answer suggested itself. They were not interested in my present life. They were interested in what I had left behind. A few minutes after 4, Celestina returned carrying a pile of freshly ironed clothes. Without asking, she opened the wardrobe. "If I left these with you, they would all be creased by tomorrow," she declared. "A man can destroy an hour's ironing with one movement of his hand." She arranged my shirts while recounting the bakery's successful day and the customers who had bought every roll from the morning batch. I listened with only half my attention. "Celestina, I am going away for 2 days tomorrow." She turned from the wardrobe. "Alone?" "With a friend." A smile appeared on her face, and she made no attempt to conceal it. "I see. You see nothing. Come as usual in the morning, but after that, look in on the house from time to time. I shall probably return on Friday evening." I handed her a spare key. "If you notice anything strange, do not go inside. Fetch your husband and call the police." Her smile vanished. "Are you expecting trouble?" "No, it is merely a precaution." She studied me for another moment, then slipped the key into the pocket of her apron. "I shall come in the morning, and I shall lock everything while you are away." "Thank you." She collected the laundry I had prepared and left, this time without her customary river of words. Before meeting Carlos, I began packing for the journey. I took a hold-all from the antique wardrobe, laid it on the bed, and stared for a moment into its empty interior. 2 days, an unknown destination, a woman unwilling to speak over the telephone, 2 men who were probably following me. I packed clothes, toiletries, and several items an ordinary tourist would not have considered necessary. Old instincts told me the age of coincidence had just come to an end. Chapter 4. An Offer for Carlos. I took a taxi to the harbor. Before leaving, I checked the street once more, but saw neither dark suits nor a car that appeared to be waiting nearby. The fishing harbor lay on the other side of the city. The journey took less than 20 minutes. The driver left me at the gate, and I continued on foot between warehouses, workshops, and heaps of netting that smelled of salt and fish. I saw Mamacita from a distance. Carlos's boat was plainly in need of rescue. Paint peeled from the hull, rust marked the superstructure, and the deck carried the scars of years of hard work. Yet she still had a sound, purposeful line. She did not look like a wreck so much as an old sailor who had survived one storm too many and had no intention of going ashore yet. 2 of Carlos's men were working on deck. I knew them from our previous voyage. Miguel was a short, thick-set Dominican with a boxer's shoulders and a temperament that regularly led him into trouble in harbor bars. Patrick, a pale, tall Irishman, was his complete opposite. He spoke little, moved calmly, and usually finished the fights Miguel had found time to begin. Carlos chose his crew exclusively from men he trusted. At sea, that principle could mean the difference between life and death. "Is the captain aboard?" I asked. Miguel straightened over the open engine room hatch and shaded his eyes with one hand. "Gone for parts. He should be back soon. Are you joining us for tuna?" "Business this time. On this boat, the fish are more reliable than business." Patrick looked up and silently pointed me towards a bench beside the superstructure. While I waited, I walked around the deck. Several planks needed replacing. The rails required welding, the electrical system belonged to another age, and the smell of diesel rising from the engine room did not promise an inexpensive refit. Even so, I could see possibilities. For months, I had been considering the idea of using a fishing boat for small-scale tourist expeditions, not luxury cruises for people who expected a waiter beside every sun-lounger, but a genuine maritime adventure, islands, fishing, nights in cramped cabins, and staged attacks by privateers. The Caribbean sold its pirate legend on every street corner. Carlos possessed the vessel, the crew, and the experience. What he lacked was money and someone prepared to turn an idea into an enterprise. A few minutes later, the captain appeared on the gangway burdened with boxes. "John," he called, So you have missed the sea after all. He set the packages down on deck and roared at the crew. Gentlemen, the rest is in the car. Move before you remember you are supposed to be on a break. Miguel and Patrick went ashore. You keep them on a short leash, I observed. They may sulk on land. In a storm, they obey orders. He indicated the boxes. Engine parts and gear for the next trip. Come down to the mess. There you can tell me what really brought you here. The interior of the boat was unexpectedly orderly. The mess table was bolted to the floor. Lockers were secured against opening when the vessel rolled, and charts of the surrounding waters hung on the wall. Everything had its proper place. Carlos set a bottle of rum on the table. No, I said. I leave early tomorrow. One glass will not sink even a land rat. He poured only a token measure, more for ritual than thirst. Speak. I am going inland for 2 days. Before I leave, I want to return to our conversation at the tavern. The murder in Aguadilla? Mamacita. Carlos rested his elbows on the table. I am listening. I want to become your partner. I shall finance a complete refit and conversion. You provide the boat, the crew, and your experience. For a long moment I heard only the sounds of work from the deck above. Carlos took out his pipe, packed it with tobacco, and lit it. Only when smoke filled the space between us did he speak again. Do you know how much that may cost? Not yet. That is why we begin with a survey and estimate. The engine alone could swallow 100,000. If necessary, I shall put in more. He regarded me suspiciously. I have never asked where your money came from. You were wise not to. Now I am to become your partner. The money for this venture is legal. That should be enough. The boat rocked in the wake of a passing motor launch. The glasses slid across the table and stopped against the raised edge. Carlos watched me through the smoke of his pipe. Suppose I agree. What do you want to do with her? Tourist voyages to the smaller islands, expeditions lasting several days for people who want to see a different Caribbean, fishing, diving, and nights aboard. We add staged attacks by privateers. Privateers? A second small vessel approaches after dark. Blank ammunition, boarding, costumes, a little rum, and a good story. No real danger, but more excitement than a hotel swimming pool can provide. The first smile appeared on Carlos's face. Miguel will not need a costume. Precisely why I want your crew as well. I spread a sheet of paper on the table and sketched a provisional arrangement. The hold could be divided into several simple double cabins. We would need lavatories, ventilation, additional water tanks, and new deck safety systems. Nothing luxurious, but clean and safe. With a sensible scope of work, we should remain within 200,000, I said. First, however, we commission a marine survey and a full estimate. I shall not invest in a vessel whose hull cannot withstand the conversion. Carlos's eyes widened. For 200,000 you could buy a younger boat. I could, but I would not get Mamacita, your crew, or a captain I trust. Half and half? My capital and responsibility for sales, your boat, experience and command of the voyages. Half the profits to each of us. A solicitor will put the details into an agreement. Carlos extinguished his pipe and looked once more at the sketch. And if the venture fails? You will still have a seaworthy, fully refitted boat. We return to fishing or sell her. And if it succeeds, we buy another. He laughed and struck the table with an open hand. Damn you, Jan. I agree, if only to satisfy my curiosity. He held out his hand. When you return, we arrange the survey and draw up the agreement. I shook it. Numbers first, celebration afterwards. One does not prevent the other. On deck, Carlos immediately announced to the crew that they had acquired a new business partner. Miguel looked at me with approval. Patrick nodded as though he had known from the beginning why I had come. At sea, I remain in command, Carlos stipulated. I have no intention of depriving you of the pleasure of giving orders. The captain gave his men the evening off. He ordered them to secure the boat and return in the morning in a condition that would allow them to distinguish port from starboard. Carlos and I left the harbor together. I felt satisfied, but doubt stirred beneath it. I had made a decision worth hundreds of thousands of dollars in the course of a single afternoon. On the other hand, for the first time in years, Mamacita offered me a plan extending beyond my next surveying commission. At the taxi rank, we climbed into an old Mercedes. To the Bull Tavern, Carlos told the driver. You had a woman who disapproved of your visits to bars, I reminded him. Now I have proof that business is conducted in taverns. I am not certain she will find the argument persuasive. Women are never satisfied, I did not reply. After the events of the previous 24 hours, I did not consider myself an authority on the subject. Tell me instead what you learned about the murder in Aguadilla. Carlos became serious at once. Today I met a relative of the murdered captain. Apparently, more than the local police are interested. Federal agents have arrived, even the FBI. There are also men about whom nobody cares to ask for names. The cartel? He looked around instinctively, although we were sitting inside a moving car. Lower your voice. In this part of the world, certain words have ears. The taxi stopped at a red light. Carlos leaned towards me. The murdered captain came upon a luxury motor yacht drifting at sea. Large, twin-engined, almost new, and with nobody aboard. He towed it to Aguadilla behind his fishing boat. If the owner did not appear, he could claim a substantial salvage award or a share of the vessel's value. Was the yacht worth killing for? About $1 million, but the yacht was not what they wanted. How do you know? After the murder, someone searched both the yacht and the captain's boat. They tore open the upholstery, opened the tanks, and stripped away sections of paneling. Then they burned both vessels. They were searching for something worth more than the two boats together. I looked through the window. The colorful streets of San Juan moved past, full of people occupied with an ordinary evening. Drugs, I said. Perhaps. Carlos did not sound convinced. Or something considerably worse. I remembered Anna's voice on the telephone and the journey whose purpose she refused to disclose. The following morning, we were due to travel inland, towards Aguadilla. Chapter 5. Under Observation. The taxi stopped outside the Bull Tavern. Music, conversation, and the smell of meat roasting over an open flame spilled through the doorway into the street. It was still early, yet scarcely a table remained free. John reached for the handle, but the driver did not unlock the doors. "Señor Carlos," he said quietly, "a white Renault has followed us from the harbor. It is parked across the street now." Carlos began to turn his head, but John immediately put a hand on his shoulder. "Do not look. We pay and go inside as though nothing were wrong." The driver accepted the banknote and only then released the lock. John got out first. He did not glance back, but in the tavern window he caught the pale outline of the car and two men sitting inside. The room lay in a pleasant half-light. Inez moved between the tables with the tray resting against one hip, composed amid the disorder, as though the noise of the customers followed a rhythm audible only to her. When she saw John, a brief smile touched her face. It vanished when she noticed his attention fixed upon the window. "What is it?" she asked. "First, find us somewhere nobody will trip over us," Carlos said. "Then we shall tell you." Inez led them to a table at the back of the room, screened from the street by a timber pillar and the dense leaves of a palm growing in a large terracotta pot. As soon as they sat down, Carlos leaned across the table. "What the hell is going on? Who is following us?" "Not us. Me," Jan replied. "Two men have been watching me for several days. I first noticed them here, then in other parts of the city. Today they appeared at the harbor." Carlos's jaw tightened. "And you tell me only now?" "Until today I was not certain. Now I am." Carlos's fist struck the table. The glasses rang and several heads turned. "Carajo, if they intend to touch you, they will have to come through me first." "Strike my table once more, and the first person you will have to come through is me," Inez said, setting down 2 bottles of beer. "And you will pay for every glass." Carlos raised his hands in surrender. "Mujer, a little respect. You are speaking to a future ship owner." "I am speaking to a madman who has spent months talking about returning to sea." "Inez, allow me formally to introduce my new partner," Carlos announced. "Jan is joining me in Mamacita." She looked closely at Jan. Amusement appeared in her eyes, along with something he had no time to name. "In that case, you have my sympathy," she said. "Carlos can sink a man's life before the boat has even left harbor. I shall take the risk." "That makes 2 madmen. What are you eating?" Carlos ordered churrasco with onions, arroz mamposteado, and tostones. Inez wrote nothing down. She knew his preferences as well as she knew every bill he had failed to settle on time for months. When she left, John gave a fuller account of the 2 men. He made no mention of his former life or of the people he preferred to leave on the other side of the Atlantic. He told Carlos only what he needed to know. The watchers were patient, had made no attempt to approach him, and evidently wished to learn his habits. "Police?" Carlos asked. "I doubt it." "Americans? They generally have better cars." Carlos snorted with laughter, then became serious again. "Enemies from Europe? If I knew, we would not be sitting beside a window." "We are not beside a window, which is why we are still here." Inez brought the food. For a while, neither man spoke. Outside, dusk gathered. The tavern grew steadily louder, and the white car remained across the street like an immovable piece of scenery. Carlos lifted his bottle. "To Mamacita, may she finally stop rotting at the quay." "To a sensible plan," John replied, touching his bottle to Carlos's. "Sensible? With me? Too late to withdraw, amigo." They discussed the boat, though this time Jan refused to let Carlos build castles upon the water. First came a full survey of the hull and machinery, then quotations from the shipyard, permits, and only after that a decision on the extent of the refit. September marked the height of hurricane season. Schedules might slip, and haste could double every cost. "In other words, no miracles within a few weeks," Jan concluded. "The miracle will be if the yard begins on the day it promises," Carlos muttered. "But Mamacita will return to sea, even if I have to scrub her bottom with a toothbrush myself." "That I shall be delighted to supervise," Inez said as she collected the empty plates. Late in the evening, the crowd began to thin. John glanced several times at the darkened window. The Renault had not moved. "I shall walk you home," Carlos decided. "If we stay together, we shall learn nothing." John outlined a simple plan. They would walk towards his house. After several blocks, Carlos would turn into a side street, circle the block, and come up behind anyone following them. No heroics and no confrontation. Observation only. "No confrontation," Inez repeated, looking directly at Carlos. "Of course," he replied with the expression of a man who had just promised the precise opposite. As they were leaving, Inez stopped John by the door. "Take care," she said more quietly. "Carlos has a good heart, but sometimes he uses it in place of his head. I shall try to make certain he keeps both tonight." They set off without hurry. The night was warm, heavy with humidity and the smell of the sea. Music came through open windows and occasional cars moved along the streets. Jan walked like a man with nothing to hide, though every nerve in his body registered the footsteps behind him. At the third junction, Carlos offered a brief hasta mañana and vanished into a narrow lane. Jan did not slow. In the window of a closed shop, he saw two figures on the opposite side of the street. They kept their distance and did not speak. He reached his house, opened the gate, and stepped onto the porch. Only after locking the door did he turn off the light in the hall. He drew the curtains but left a narrow gap between them. The two men stopped several dozen yards away. One lit a cigarette. The other watched the house. After a few minutes, the white Renault pulled up. The driver lowered his window. The men exchanged a few words with him, then walked away towards the center. The car remained where it was. Carlos appeared in the garden 15 minutes later. He tapped the agreed rhythm on the window, and Jan admitted him through the rear door. There were two of them, Carlos said without greeting him. They kept to the opposite side of the street. When you entered the house, the same Renault arrived. They spoke to the driver and disappeared. The car is still there. I saw them. Those are not inquisitive neighbors, Jan. No? Jan went to the table and rested both hands on its surface. Over the years, he had learned that danger itself was not the worst thing. Far worse was not knowing from which direction it would come. If the past had found him on the island, he had to vanish before the people in the Renault made their next move. I cannot stay here tonight, he said. I need somewhere for a day or two. My house. At 9 tomorrow, I have a meeting I cannot cancel. With Anna, Jan gave him a warning look. With someone who may know why my peaceful life has just ended. Carlos sighed. Very well. We leave through the garden, cross the neighbor's property, and take a taxi 2 streets away. There is only one problem. My wife. More dangerous than the men in the Renault? Considerably. They would merely shoot me. For the first time that evening, Jan smiled without effort. They took only what would fit into their pockets. Several minutes later, they crossed the dew-wet garden, climbed a low wall, and disappeared between the houses. The white Renault continued to wait outside an empty building. The taxi dropped them in a quiet street on the outskirts of the city. Carlos's house was small and single-storied, with a broad porch and a roof extending far enough to shelter the windows from rain. A light burned behind one of them. Carlos stopped at the gate. Now, amigo, behave naturally and let me do the talking. After tonight, that sounds like the most dangerous part of the plan. Carlos pressed the handle. Quick footsteps came from inside the house. Jan thought of Anna and the meeting arranged for 9 in the morning. Whoever was sitting in the white car tomorrow, he had to learn the truth. Chapter 6. The Nightmare. The door flew open. A dark-haired woman stood on the threshold with a dressing gown thrown over her shoulders and the expression of someone who had been woken after midnight once too often. Carlos, have you any idea what time it is? She began in Spanish, firing the words with the speed of a machine gun. You come home from the tavern again, and now you bring people here without warning. Carlos tried to interrupt, but she did not leave him so much as a comma. Maria, calm down. We have a guest. I can see that we have a guest. I am not blind. John stood beside the gate with the uncomfortable feeling that the men in the white Renault would have been the simpler problem. I apologize for arriving like this, he said. The circumstances are unusual. If I am causing trouble, I shall find somewhere else. Maria looked at him, then at her husband. Her anger did not disappear, but suspicion took its place. What trouble? Let us go inside first, Carlos said. There is no need for every neighbor to hear us. The neighbors have known for years what sort of man I married. Basta, Maria. Jan is in danger. He stays with us tonight. There was something in Carlos's voice that his wife evidently did not hear often. She stepped aside and allowed them into the house. A small lamp burned in the sitting room. Photographs of their children, Paintings of the sea and a modest image of the Virgin Mary hung on the walls. An old table with carved legs occupied the center of the room. Everything was simple, spotless, and carefully tended. "Sit down," Maria said coolly. "Since you have already woken half the house, I should like to know why." Carlos told her about the meeting at the harbor, Jan's offer, and the plan to restore Mamacita to service. He made no grand promises about figures or deadlines. First, there would be a survey at the shipyard, he explained, an assessment of the hull and machinery, and only then a proper estimate. Maria listened with her arms folded. Once she understood that this was not another of her husband's fantasies, but a genuine chance to save the family boat, the tension slowly left her face. "Do you truly mean to go into business with him?" she asked Jan. "Yes, provided we proceed sensibly and follow the surveyor's findings." "Sensibly," she repeated, directing a meaningful look at Carlos. "That word rarely crosses this threshold in my husband's company." "That is why I brought home a partner," Carlos replied. "You see, it is working already." Maria held out her hand to Jan. "Forgive my welcome. The last few months have not been easy for us." "There is nothing to forgive. I am the one who arrived unannounced after midnight. I am John." "Maria?" "And now," Carlos interjected, "since we are one happy family, might we have something warm? You may have the bill for repairing the gate you left open again." Despite the words, warmth had entered her voice. She went to the kitchen and returned a few minutes later with 3 mugs of ginger and lemon infusion. The conversation turned to Carlos and Maria's children. Their son worked in the United States, while their daughter studied in London. Her tuition and living expenses consumed a considerable share of the family's income, and the boat that was meant to provide it had stood idle at the quay for months. "Are you from Europe?" Maria asked. "Poland." She hesitated. "That is somewhere far to the east?" "Central Europe, next to Germany, among others. And contrary to what I occasionally hear, we do not have snow throughout the year." Maria laughed at her mistake. The last of the tension left the room. Carlos showed Jan to his son's small bedroom. It contained a single bed, a desk, and shelves of books nobody had touched in a long time. "I shall wake you before 7, he said. "I have to visit the harbor in the morning." "Thank you, Carlos, for everything. You discover who your friends are when a strange car is parked outside your house. Besides, we are practically family now." "Do not tell Maria. She has only just stopped shouting." Carlos smiled and closed the door. Jan lay down without undressing, leaving his clothes on the chair within reach. His body demanded sleep, but his thoughts returned stubbornly to the men who had followed him from the harbor. After meeting Anna, he intended to revive a few old contacts and discover who had found him on the island. Sleep came suddenly, as though someone had switched off a light. He woke to the faintest sound of metal sliding against metal. A dark figure stood beyond the balcony doors, slender, not very tall, the face hidden beneath a balaclava. Jan tried to move, but his body would not respond. His muscles were heavy, his breathing shallow, and a familiar pressure was building in his chest. He could see every movement of the intruder, yet could not raise a hand. The lock yielded. The figure entered without a sound, confidently and without the slightest hesitation. This was no chance burglar. Every movement betrayed training. A second later, the attacker was on the bed. Hands closed around Jan's throat. The pressure increased, depriving him of air. He tried to break the grip, but his arms moved as though beneath water. At last his fingers caught the fabric of the balaclava. He pulled with all his strength. Chestnut hair spilled from beneath the black cloth. Anna stared down at him with a face that was strange and utterly still. Jan tried to speak her name. Only a strangled cry escaped his throat, and the image dissolved into darkness. "Jan, wake up!" Someone was shaking him hard. He opened his eyes and saw Carlos leaning over him. Maria stood in the doorway, pale and frightened. The balcony was empty and its doors were closed. Jan sat up sharply. His shirt clung to his back, and his heart struck so violently that he felt each beat in his throat. For several seconds he could not tell where the dream ended and reality began. "What happened?" Carlos asked. "You were screaming as though someone was murdering you." "A nightmare. Only a nightmare." "Only," Carlos indicated the double-barreled shotgun tucked beneath his arm. He stood barefoot in floral pajamas, his beard pointing in every direction. "I nearly shot my own chair." Jan looked at him and, despite the tremor still lingering in his hands, began to laugh. Maria joined him first. The laughter did not last long, but it was enough to release the tension. "What time is it?" Jan asked. 4:30, Maria replied. "Since you have woken everybody, take a cold shower. I shall make an early breakfast." Carlos lowered the gun. "And do not fall asleep again. I have no more chairs to shoot." When they left him alone, Jan went to the balcony and examined the lock. It was intact. It was a dream, he told himself, an ordinary response to exhaustion and strain. Yet he could not forget Anna's face or the hands closing around his throat. His subconscious was attempting to warn him of something. He simply did not yet know what. Chapter 7. The Road West. A few minutes before 9, Jan was waiting on a bench opposite the hotel. He had not entered the lobby. From the place he had chosen, he could see the main entrance, the driveway, and the street reflected in the broad windows of a nearby shop. The nightmare had left him tired, with an unpleasant pressure beneath his breastbone. A cold shower and strong coffee had restored the clarity of his thoughts, but Anna's face emerging from beneath the balaclava remained fixed in his memory. He reminded himself that it had been only a dream. His subconscious had combined his fear of the unknown men with the woman whose sudden arrival had coincided with the beginning of the surveillance. Nothing more. At 5 minutes to 9, he lit a cigarette. Taxis arrived at the hotel one after another, delivering tourists with suitcases. The doorman opened doors, drivers called for fares, and the humid morning air carried the smell of salt from the ocean. He saw neither the white Renault nor either of the men who had followed him the previous evening. At 7 minutes past 9, a dark green Jeep with its soft top folded back turned into the driveway. Anna was at the wheel. Jan picked up his bag and walked towards the vehicle. She wore a green blouse, light canvas trousers, and trainers. Her chestnut hair was tied loosely behind her head, though the wind had already freed several strands and was brushing them across her cheek. "Good morning," she said with a smile. "Have you been waiting long?" "Long enough to inspect every guest at the hotel and half the drivers in San Juan." He leaned in and kissed her briefly. For a moment she returned the kiss, then nodded towards the passenger seat. "Get in, Jan. We have a long way to go." She pulled smoothly into the morning traffic. "Where are we going?" he asked. "To the western side of the island. I have to meet someone. The rest of the day belongs to us." "Does this someone have a name?" "He does. You will learn it when necessary." She said it lightly, but left no room for further questions. Jan settled back and watched her hands on the wheel. She drove with confidence and without a nervous movement. She knew both the vehicle and the road better than her story of a tourist excursion suggested. "You have been here before," he said. Anna glanced at him from the corner of her eye. "For a month, a long time ago. And you never thought it worth mentioning." "It was a working visit. Joint exercises with the British and Americans. Very little sightseeing and a great deal of work." "What sort of exercises?" "The sort one does not discuss over breakfast." She smiled, but Jan saw that she had closed the door on one part of her life. He did not press her. He had entire years behind him about which he had never told her a single word. The Jeep joined the road west. The buildings of San Juan gradually gave way to green hills, plantations, and small towns clinging to the highway. In the open vehicle, the wind softened the mounting heat. Anna asked about his life on the island. Jan told her of his first months in Puerto Rico, of learning the local customs, and of Carlos, whom he had met at a time when both men needed someone they could trust. "Yesterday I became part owner of a fishing boat," he said. "You, a fisherman?" "More a man of ideas and accounts. Carlos knows the sea. My task is to prevent his enthusiasm from sinking us before we leave harbor." He told her about Mamacita and the plan to convert the boat. He deliberately omitted what had happened after leaving the tavern. He wanted to listen to Anna's untroubled laughter for a little longer before the conversation changed direction. After an hour on the road, they stopped at a small restaurant surrounded by palms. Its terrace overlooked green hills, and inside were only a few travelers and two local men drinking coffee at the bar. Anna ordered café con leche. Jan chose black coffee, eggs with sofrito, toast and slices of fried plantain. Only after the waitress had left did he notice the fatigue in Anna's face. Faint shadows beneath her eyes and fine lines did not lessen her beauty. They merely made her real, a woman distinct from the girl his memory had preserved for years. "What happens after this mysterious expedition?" he asked. "Afterwards, a few more months of work and then retirement. Are you serious?" "For the first time in years, I want to stop living with a suitcase beneath the bed and a telephone that may ring at any hour." "Have you made plans?" Anna traced a finger around the rim of her cup. "Not yet. Most of all, I should like to find somewhere quiet and a man beside whom I need not pretend." Her gaze remained upon him a fraction longer than necessary. Jan felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee. For a brief moment he saw a shared home, mornings beside the ocean, and a fishing boat returning to harbor at dusk. The vision vanished when two men in dark glasses entered the restaurant. They were not the men from the white Renault, but they reminded Jan that the previous night remained unexplained. "There is something I ought to tell you," he began. Anna put down her cup. "I'm listening. Someone has been watching me for several days. Two men. Yesterday they followed me from the harbor and later waited outside my house." The change in her face was immediate. The warmth disappeared, replaced by cold concentration. "Since when, exactly?" "I'm not certain." "Jan, think. Where did you first see them?" He told her about the evening after their meeting at the hotel, the two well-dressed men at Inez's tavern, the later, apparently, accidental encounters, and the white Renault. As he spoke, Anna leaned closer, as though every detail mattered. "Did they see you with me?" she asked. "They may have seen me leaving the hotel." "Damn it." She rose so abruptly that the chair scraped across the floor. "What is happening? We have to leave, now." "Explain first." "Not here." She paid before he could object. A moment later, the jeep left the car park considerably faster than it had entered. "Adjust the mirror," Anna ordered. "Watch the vehicles behind us. Do not focus only on the nearest one. Look for anything maintaining its distance and repeating our maneuvers." Jan obeyed. Her voice no longer belonged to the woman who had spoken of retirement minutes earlier. It was calm, precise, and entirely free of hesitation. "Who are you, Anna?" he asked. "Later." She drove quickly, but without recklessness. At a junction, she slowed and allowed several cars to pass, then abruptly turned onto a side road heading north. John watched the long stretch of highway in the mirror. No vehicle repeated the maneuver. "Clear," he said. "Nobody turned after us." Anna did not immediately reduce her speed. Only after the next bend did she take a narrower road running towards the ocean. "We have no tail," John repeated. "Can you now tell me why the news frightened you so much?" "First, we find somewhere with a view of the road." A few minutes later, they reached a wild stretch of coast. Grasses and low shrubs covered the sandy dunes, with the ocean beyond. The sky above them remained bright, but dark blue clouds were massing on the horizon. Distant lightning divided the line of the storm. Anna parked facing the road so they could leave without turning. She switched off the engine and sat motionless for a moment. "It is no coincidence," she said at last. "Those men appeared when I arrived, which is precisely why I ought to know whom you have brought to my door." Anna released her seatbelt. He saw tension in her eyes, but also resolve. "I am no longer the girl you remember. For many years I did things I could not tell you about. I came here for a specific reason." "Am I part of that reason?" She hesitated only a moment. "I need your knowledge of the island Jan, and I need someone I can trust." It was not a complete answer. They both knew it. Anna got out. Jan followed her towards the beach. The ocean wind lifted the sand and cooled their heated skin. "If I am to help you, there will be no more half-truths," he said. "Very well. I shall tell you everything I can. But for you to understand, I must begin with a meeting that took place in London several days ago." Lightning flashed again on the horizon. This time, thunder reached them a few seconds later. Anna looked towards the approaching storm. "At the time, I did not yet know that someone was watching our every move." Chapter 8. Orders from Vauxhall Cross, London, several days earlier. The Colonel and Captain Adam left a Victoria line train at Vauxhall Station. The afternoon crowd immediately swept them towards the escalators. Both wore dark suits and carried small briefcases. They looked like civil servants on their way to a meeting that no one would remember the following day. Only they knew that merely a handful of people in Warsaw had been informed of their visit. "Which exit, Colonel?" Adam asked. The older man did not even look at him. "I am not a colonel here. Remember that before we enter the building." "Of course, sir." On leaving the station, they saw the massive headquarters of the Secret Intelligence Service across the busy road. Sandstone and greenish glass reflected the light, while the terrace structure resembled a modern fortress more than an office building. "We have 20 minutes, Adam said, checking his watch. "In a place like this, 10 minutes early is preferable to 1 minute late." At the entrance, their identity papers and credentials were taken from them. They passed through successive security checks, left their telephones and watches in secure lockers, and watched their briefcases disappear briefly into a machine whose operation was concealed from view. No one explained the procedures. No one asked unnecessary questions either. After several minutes, a woman in a navy suit approached them. "Gentlemen, the chief is expecting you. Please follow me." She took them to a lift operated by card and code. Adam glanced discreetly around the cabin, searching for floor numbers. "Please do not try to memorize the route," their escort said without the trace of a smile. "We shall take you out by a different one in any case." The colonel raised an eyebrow. Adam fixed his eyes upon the doors. The office into which they were shown overlooked the Thames and Vauxhall Bridge. It contained no family photographs and no personal objects that revealed anything about its occupant. A single slim closed file lay on the desk. The chief of SIS, traditionally known as C, welcomed them with a brief handshake. He was tall and lean, with gray at the temples, and a voice so calm that every sentence sounded like a decision already made. "Thank you for coming at such short notice. May we conduct the meeting in English?" "Of course," the colonel replied. Tea appeared on a side table. Nobody touched it. 36 hours ago, we lost contact with one of our officers operating in the Caribbean," C began. "Codename Jastrom. He was seriously wounded and managed to send only one message." The chief opened the file and slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. "I do not know whether I can deliver it. I have hidden the package where I declared my love to Phoenix." Adam read the sentence twice. "Is that all?" "All of it." His transmitter then went silent. The colonel betrayed no emotion, but his fingers became motionless on the arm of the chair. You believe Phoenix is one of ours? We do not believe it. We know it. C produced a second sheet. It contained the dates of joint British, American, and Polish exercises in the Caribbean, together with the names of those who had taken part. Your officer attended as the service's representative, liaison officer, and observer attached to the special operations teams. That is when she met Yastromb. Our assessment is that she alone can interpret his clue. You intend to send her alone? Adam asked. Officially, she is merely to assess the situation and establish whether the agent is alive. Unofficially, she is to identify the location of the package. Our people will recover it. Why not entrust the entire operation to your own team? C closed the file. Because the more people who know its true purpose, the less chance we have of recovering the package. Someone seized the boat Yastromb had been using. Cuban intelligence and men connected to a Colombian cartel are searching for the same thing. We also have indications of involvement by a terrorist organization. Silence settled over the office. What is in the package? The colonel asked. I cannot give you a complete answer. It contains material that may confirm preparations for a major attack on United States territory. Some of the intelligence indicates a biological threat. And the Americans? They will not be informed at this stage. If they set the entire machine in motion, the people we are seeking will disappear, and the package with them. We first need to establish what Yastromb obtained and where he concealed it. Adam looked at the colonel. One officer against Cuban intelligence, a cartel and terrorists. That is not reconnaissance. Which is why she will have support on the ground, C replied. But she cannot know the entire team or its methods. From her perspective, the task will remain simple. Find Yastromb, understand the clue, and transmit the location of the package. Does she know what she is looking for? No. For the moment, it will remain that way. The colonel rose and walked to the window. A white passenger boat moved along the Thames, while traffic stood in an afternoon queue on the bridge. Ordinary London had no idea that several floors above it, men were discussing an attack whose consequences none of them could yet calculate. Phoenix will decide for herself whether to accept the assignment, he said. Naturally, C replied, although we both know what her answer will be. The colonel turned slowly. Who else knows the contents of the message? At present, 3 people on our side. I expect the same discipline from yours. You shall have it. The men shook hands. The meeting was over, but Adam remained beside his chair for a moment. One further question, he said. Did Yastromb leave anything apart from the message? C hesitated, then shook his head. Nothing our people recognized as a clue. That is why we need Phoenix. After they left the office, Adam waited until their escort had moved several paces ahead. Sir, do you know this Phoenix? I know her file. That was not what I asked. Then do not ask it twice. On the beach in Puerto Rico, Anna paused. The wind tore at her hair while the distant storm moved along the horizon. The following day I received orders to leave, she said. Officially, I was to find the missing agent and establish what had happened aboard the boat. I knew only that the package existed and that Yastromb had left a clue intended for me. Jan watched her in silence. What was he to you? Anna turned her eyes towards the ocean. A man I worked with during those exercises years ago. He trusted me. For now, that must be enough. It was not enough. The words of the message were too personal, and her answer too carefully measured. Jan felt a stab of jealousy, but kept it from his voice. And the men following me? If they appeared after my arrival, someone knows my role. They may expect me to lead them to Yastromb or the package. You became interesting to them because I chose to meet you. Why did you choose me? Because you know this island, its roads, its ports, and its people. I needed someone local whom I could trust. Jan walked several paces along the shore. The waves erased his footprints almost at once. He could refuse. He should refuse. For years he had built a life without covert operations, coded messages, or people willing to kill for the contents of a small package. But Anna had brought danger to his door, and he still could not leave her to face it alone. He returned after several minutes. "I shall help you find Jastrzęb and the place he indicated," he said. "But from this moment on, you tell me everything that may affect our safety. No more surprises." "Agreed. And do not assume the people in London have the situation under control. If they did, nobody would have been waiting outside my house." Anna nodded. "What do you suggest?" John looked towards the road, then at the dark blue wall of the approaching storm. "First, we disappear from the route they prepared for you. Then we find somewhere quiet and decide whom we can actually trust." Chapter 9. The Hotel in Aguadilla. The storm was moving in from the ocean when they returned to the jeep. Anna started the engine, but Jan did not get in. He walked around the vehicle, crouched beside the rear wheel, and ran one hand beneath the edge of the bodywork. "What are you looking for?" she asked, an answer to the question of how they found me at the harbor. He found nothing, though he did not look convinced. He climbed in and pointed towards a road leading into the interior. "Aren't we returning to the main road?" "Not yet. First we make certain we are actually alone." Over the next several miles, Anna changed direction repeatedly. John watched the road in the mirrors and memorized the cars that appeared behind them. None repeated every maneuver, nor did he see the men who had stood outside his house the previous evening. "I cannot see a tail," he said. Anna kept her eyes on the road. "Are you sure?" "That is precisely what worries me. They knew where we were, and now they have suddenly stopped showing themselves. Pull into the service station." She stopped beside a pump bearing the Shell emblem. Jan got out as though stretching his legs. He bought 2 bottles of water, walked around the building, and approached the jeep from the delivery area. The road behind them remained empty. Nobody stopped at the station, and nobody attempted to watch them at close quarters. "Move over to the air pump and open the bonnet," he said, leaning towards her door. "If they do not need to see us, they are probably watching the vehicle." Anna did as he asked. Jan pretended to check the fluid levels, then knelt beside the right front wheel. Deep behind the plastic wheel-arch liner, his fingers found a small, flat object held in place by a powerful magnet. He removed it carefully. The black casing bore no markings. "A tracker," Anna said, "which is why they need not remain close. They merely watch our position on a GPS display." He weighed the device in his palm for a moment, then he walked over to a nearby lorry heading east and slipped it behind a metal guard beneath the trailer. Approximately 2 miles away, 2 men watched a moving point on a screen. They could not see the jeep, nor did they need to. When the transmitter began traveling east, their car turned and followed at a safe distance. "In a few minutes, our friends will be on their way towards San Juan," John said when he returned. "We shall travel in the opposite direction." "Have you done this sort of thing before?" "Anyone who lives on an island long enough learns how to deal with unwanted visitors." The answer was so implausible that Anna did not dignify it even with a smile. Once the lorry had gone, they waited several more minutes before leaving by a side exit. John directed them along progressively narrower roads. Tarmac gave way to compacted gravel, then to a track cutting through dense vegetation. Branches brushed against the sides of the jeep, leaving wet streaks on the paintwork. Half an hour later, they emerged onto a winding road climbing towards the green hills of the Cordillera Central. "Where now?" Anna asked. "Aguadilla. I know a small hotel there. It is not luxurious, but the owner accepts cash and asks no questions." "Is there anyone on this island you do not know?" "Yes, the men following the tracker's signal, which is precisely why we are going to Aguadilla." They reached the town late in the afternoon. The hotel stood a little apart, between a vehicle workshop and a closed bar. Its faded facade promised no comforts, but the upper floors offered a view of the roads leading into the town. John paid for a room under a name Anna had never heard before. The receptionist did not ask for identification. "Another local custom?" she asked as the lift began to rise. "Courtesy towards a man who pays in advance." The room was small, one wide bed, a table, 2 chairs, and a balcony overlooking wooded hills. The air conditioner labored noisily, and the bathroom had no hot water. "It will do for me," Jan said, putting down his bag. "There is only one bed. I can sleep on the floor." Anna regarded him for a long moment. "That is not why I found you again after all these years." She walked over and rested her forehead against his chest. For a while they stood without speaking, listening to the air conditioner and the first drops of rain striking the balcony. The tension of the past several hours began to recede only when Jan held her more tightly. Their kiss was nothing like the one at the hotel in San Juan. There was no uncertainty in it, no cautious attempt to discover how much of their former intimacy remained. It was driven by the need to reclaim time they both believed they had lost. Later they lay side by side beneath a thin sheet. The rain had stopped and cooler air entered through the open balcony doors. Jan stared at the ceiling. Anna's closeness had calmed his body without silencing his questions. In the space of one day he had discovered that the woman he had carried in his memory for years was an intelligence officer who had come to find another man, a man who had left a message about a declaration of love. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "That we must act before our watchers discover they are following a lorry." Anna sat up and reached for the telephone. "I shall call my contact. He was supposed to give me the latest information." The conversation was brief. She used neutral phrases, but Jan understood the meaning concealed between them. The boat Jastromp had used was now in the custody of the local police. Men claiming to represent several different agencies were circling the harbor, and Anna was to meet an SIS officer the following morning to receive additional equipment. After ending the call, she spread a map across the table. "They are looking for us," she said. "The Cubans have our descriptions. My contact believes people connected to the cartel are interested in us as well." "How do they know we are working together?" "I don't know." "That is the most important thing you learned today." Anna looked up. "What do you mean?" "Either they knew you were coming or they watched you from the moment you arrived. In either case, the information may have leaked from people familiar with the operation. From now on, we trust nobody merely because he knows the correct password." "Including my contact?" "Especially him, until we know who is sending him to the meeting." Jan bent over the map. "You will go alone. If they are primarily following you, they will expect me to be somewhere nearby. Meanwhile, I shall prepare our escape route." "I disagree. I did not bring you here so that we could separate. You brought me because I know the island. Allow me to make use of that knowledge." He moved one finger across the map and stopped at a car park beside a network of caves. "Here. Since the last accident, when several people fell into one of the caves, tourists have avoided the place. Travel companies removed it from their routes. Coaches no longer stop there, and private visitors are rare. The car park should be completely empty in the morning. There is one approach road, plenty of open ground, and several possible ways out. I know the terrain. If it is a trap, the open ground becomes a firing range. Which is why we need rather more than your pistol." Anna studied him. "Where will you obtain weapons?" "From a man who owes me a favor." "Who is he?" "His name is Boris. That is enough." Jan asked for the telephone. He dialed the number from memory, then stepped onto the balcony and closed the door behind him. Boris answered after the 4th ring. "Yes? Hello, old friend. It has been a long time." There was a brief silence at the other end. "Jan?" I would sooner have expected a telephone call from the grave. Where have you been? Resting. Now I need equipment. You said you were finished with the business. This is not a return. One job. That is what everyone says. What do you need? Jan listed weapons, ammunition, surveillance equipment, field clothing, and medical supplies. He gave neither names nor the purpose of the operation. Boris did not interrupt. Only when the list was complete did he release his breath. You are not planning an excursion. You are planning a small war. I need everything before dawn. For 2 days, everyone in the Caribbean has been asking about a Polish man and a red-haired woman. They are offering more for information than I would earn from your order. Then name a price at which it remains profitable to be my friend. Boris swore in Russian. I shall bring it myself. Send the location through a secure channel. And remember, John, when someone offers that kind of money merely to identify a man, he does not intend to have a conversation with him. I know. No, you don't. Not yet. But you will before dawn. The call ended. When John returned to the room, Anna was waiting beside the table. You have not told me everything about yourself, she said. Neither have you. I am trying to change that. And I am trying to keep us alive. Anger appeared in her eyes, but quickly yielded to exhaustion. Who are you, John? A man who knows Boris and can obtain the equipment we need. For tonight, that will have to be enough. She did not know the true extent of his abilities, and she could not be allowed to know. Not yet. The less she understood, the less danger there was to both of them. Jan looked at the map again. The caves lay several dozen miles from the hotel. The meeting was set for 9 in the morning. I shall leave for the equipment at 4, he said. I shall be back before 8. Until then, you do not leave this room and you open the door to no one. And afterwards? You go to meet your contact. Alone. Alone. Anna did not look convinced, but she nodded. Beyond the window, Aguadilla was sinking into darkness. A car passed along the street, slowed outside the hotel, and continued on its way. John drew the curtain aside no more than the width of a finger. He recognized neither the make nor the driver. Neither of them would sleep peacefully that night.